Lingua Brutalica is a podcast that uses ethnographic interviews to study language use in the extreme metal community. We are studying a music scene known for its love of themes and topics generally considered offensive, and it is likely that some episodes will touch on topics or opinions some listeners may find tasteless or ethically problematic. Ethnographic researchers aim to adopt the interviewee's point of view so that we can draw out and study the attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are important to them. We want to make it clear that in presenting these conversations here, we do not endorse any of their content. Our aim is to explore the thought processes behind language use in this long-running, international, and yet understudied scene. Hey everyone, welcome back to Lingua Brutalica with me, Jess Benny Smith, and my co-host, Wes Robertson.
Hello.
Today we're expanding our repertoire of multilingual artist interviews by speaking to vocalist and lyricist Karina Utomo about her English medium lyrics for High Tension and her Indonesian and Old Javanese lyrics for Rinuwat. Thanks for being with us today, Karina. How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Jess. Thanks so much for having me, and Wes.
Lovely to have you here.
Yeah, it's great. I suppose starting off as we always do, would you mind just giving us an introduction into the music for High Tension and Rinuwat?
Yes, so I'm just speaking on from Wurundjeri country. I just want to acknowledge quickly that I work and live on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Woiwurrung and Bunurong speaking clans of the Kulin Nation. And I just would like to acknowledge their connection to land, to culture, to language, and that sovereignty has never been ceded. Yeah, my name is Karina, and I have been an extreme metal vocalist for, since 2000 and maybe the past 10 years. I've been really working on extreme metal vocals, but also in the past few years going into more experimental realms. I have a couple of projects, High Tension, which is, I guess, like a metal project with, in the beginning, was informed very much by punk and hardcore. But our latest album, Purge, I guess is more in the, extreme metal territory. And this year I've begun 2 new projects called Rinuwat. And that project explores Gamelan notation, Bahasa Kawi, which is ancient Javanese language, and Bahasa Indonesia. And that was a particularly exciting album to work on with my collaborators, Mike Desalons, who is also in High Tension and produced the High Tension album, also Rinuwat, and Rama Parwata, who is a drummer, percussionist. He plays in a lot of bands. The most sort of established and well-known one is probably White Horse, which is a doom band. And another project that I started with Rama is called Kilat, and that's a black metal project with Ben Andrews, who is in My Disco and Agents of Abhorrence. Really incredible grindcore band with one of my favorite drummers in Australia, Max Cohane.
Awesome. That's an extremely wide range of genres there that your music covers. Have you always had kind of that eclectic taste, or how did you get into metal? What was sort of your entry point, and how did it expand into, wanting to be involved in so many different types?
Yes, I'm very greedy with my participation in metal. So I guess I got into, what would be the gateway would be hardcore, I guess. I think for maybe a lot of metal fans, you discover a genre of music that's heavy, and then I guess you can go on that trajectory of wanting to explore more extreme levels of abrasion and distortion. So I definitely went down that path as opposed to, going in terms of being a performer as well, going softer over the years. I definitely wanted, especially in terms of voice experimentation and performance. I think there's still more that I'm yet to learn to be able to achieve with my voice. And I guess, I don't know, I guess I've just always been a really curious metal fan. But I definitely I've always loved black metal. And, when I first discovered the genre, maybe, I don't know, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago or however long. But before then, I guess I was listening to a lot of heavy kind of blackened hardcore or just heavy stuff in general. But it was really kind of like in terms of, I was invited to be a soloist for an opera by an incredible composer whose name is Kat Hope. And prior to performing and in the opera as a extreme metal singer alongside opera singers and other experimental singers, that really opened up my, I think it really opened up a lot of possibilities, I think, in terms of the parameters of metal and experimental music and the methods in, I guess, writing for those genres. So that was being invited to do Make It Up Club, which is this long-running avant-garde improvisation night that has been going, I think next year in January will be the 24th anniversary. So, and there's a real intersection there with a lot of extreme metal performers like black metal and grindcore, that will be, curated alongside experimental artists. So that was a really kind of, what would be the word? Yeah, it was an inspiring kind of, I felt like it gave me a lot of revelations about expression and methods around performance.
Are there any particular artists within, various subgenres of extreme metal or hardcore that you consider to be particularly influential in shaping your own kind of extreme metal identity and music within the scene?
I'm a really big fan of Oranzi Pazuzu, and I think that they are very refined and, pioneering in the way that they approach that genre. So they're a band from Finland, and bands like Terra Tenebrosa as well, and Senyawa, of course. They wouldn't consider themselves a metal band, but I would say that they definitely belong in, they would appeal to metal and extreme music fans and experimental fans as well. And they've also collaborated with Stephen O'Malley from Sun, which was, so yeah, there's a lot of like metal people that are frothing over, which is so incredible, because I do see Senyawa as a band that transcends the, genres, but they're so prodigious in their craft that they've basically created this celestial entity of their own. So I think that, I think definitely, those three bands, I would say I'm big fan.
I guess speaking of kind of this general celestial entity and transcending the boundaries you mentioned, Do you think there is a way to kind of define metal? Does it have kind of boundaries that can be delineated? And if so, how do we do that?
I think that because metal is so vast and there's so many pockets, hyper niche pockets that exist in this like metal heavy terrain, I think it's up to the participants to decide how they want to define metal, like what is metal to them. So I think that, I don't know, I think that it is one of those things that I don't want to read someone else's definition of what is, I wouldn't want to, go to a Wikipedia page and have these set of rules of like, what is metal? What isn't metal? And I also think that it's a really kind of reductive and almost frustrating aspect of metal as a genre, when if someone feels that they can tell you what is and what isn't metal. I feel like it's such a personal, for me personally, I feel that it's such a personal connection that I would it is one of those things that cannot be defined. It can't be easily illuminated. It is such a personal thing.
If there is no like generic definition that you can kind of latch on to, I mean, do you have your own personal definition of what metal means to you?
I don't think it could be defined by words, but it is like a sonic experience, or and sometimes it's maybe sonically doesn't fit in the sort of the style or the aesthetics of metal, but it's still heavy, and it's this kind of like really nuanced spectrum, I guess. So yes, can you tell I don't want to?
Yeah.
No, it's fair enough.
I don't want to set the boundaries here. And I think that's one of the most exciting things of the genre, is that, as soon as you realize that there shouldn't be these parameters, and this sort of like need to belong, within the confines of metal, it's actually so liberating to just then be able to enjoy it.
Yeah.
What about within just the topic of language? Is there metal approaches to language? Is there lyrics that just aren't metal in your opinion, or is that also quite vague?
I would definitely describe. I definitely wouldn't define that either, because I think it's a few things. So when it's delivered in the sort of abrasive, distorted styles of metal vocals, I think that adds to the abstraction and fits into the aesthetics of, I guess that metal kind of sound. So often the lyrical component is already an abstraction anyway, that it almost it's sort of like a second thing. If you did, you would connect with it, but not necessarily, perhaps your ear can't, sometimes after certain singers you can decipher, even if they're delivering it in the harsh voice, you can still decipher what they're saying. But I feel like that understanding comes after the initial connection to that expression. So yeah, I guess I would say I feel like that's a like a homework thing as a listener. Mm-hmm. If you really wanted to know and engage further and understand explicitly the lyrical contents of that song, you would go and do that. But I think that's
Yeah.
A secondary aspect of connecting to something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's certainly a comment that we've heard before. People saying that like the vocals are more of like a percussive instrument primarily. And then, you know, the lyrics are kind of like a secondary resource that people can go to, as you say, like if they're interested in doing that, you know, extra homework. Right. But if they were to do that homework, I mean, do you think that you have a sense of like what makes for like good lyrics that'd be satisfying to read if you were to, you know, go that extra mile and do that work?
I think I'm more interested in, you know, lyrical craft that sits outside the sort of quintessential metal lyrics approach. Because, yeah, I think it's hard. I think it can be difficult to be pioneering in your lyrical content because it's sort of like, I think a lot of metal is still bound to those parameters of like, this is a death metal band, this is a gore, you know, this is a gore grind band, and this is a black metal band. So there's, you know, particular aspects that I guess participants are still kind of honoring for those particular genres. But that's not to say that I don't enjoy it because, you know, even doing the black metal project is such a different method to, so Kilat, the black metal project, such a different method to Rinuwat that there's so much, you know, there's still so much appeal in both methods, whether you have a tighter parameter or not. Yeah.
So would you broadly say like that when you're writing your own lyrics, you don't really draw on a specific kind of tradition or someone has inspired you? Where do you get kind of your inspiration from in the way that you craft and shape lyrics when you're writing?
So for me, it really depends on the song, on the album, but I think the initial kind of method is the essence, like the essence of the spirit of the song or the atmosphere of the song that should be carried through. And because of my way of engaging with metal is the execution of voice, and you know the way that the voice is composed is important, so I almost work backwards from there. But often you know, the lyrical content will just show itself in that process. So that's often how I work. And or if for the sake of mapping out, so particular tones, particular words will get you to achieve a more sort of brutal or deeper tone. And I feel like that's essential to the composition process. So sometimes I'll have, you know, particular words that will fit the spirit of the vocal execution. And so, you know, I guess it's that puzzle, and it is a lot of kind of like, you know, you have this kind of overarching goal, you know what kind of message or spirit you're sort of trying to execute in a particular song, and then the lyrical components will just have to, you know, yeah, they just show themselves, I guess.
So when did you first start writing lyrics?
When I was like in primary school, probably.
Oh, very early.
They weren't metal lyrics at that time, were they? Or
sorry,
but they weren't metal lyrics at that time, right? It wasn't like you weren't writing black metal lyrics in elementary school.
I wasn't writing black metal lyrics, but I was writing. I was just writing, you know, poetry and journal entries and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe your lyric writing process? How has it changed since those early days to now?
I think in the early days, because I didn't learn guitar until I was 14. And, you know, the way I learned piano was also not for songwriting, but, you know, to be a classical pianist. I didn't last very long because and I guess, yeah, so I guess it's different because you're writing, the writing process is completely different. And in fact, I probably should be writing a lot more than I am. At the moment, a lot of my writing practice is after the music or in the process, happens simultaneously in the process of music making as well.
And what does that process actually involve? So, like, I assume, do you write the song first and then got kind of a bit of a structure to work with and then kind of generate ideas about concepts? Or, yeah, what's the kind of step-by-step of it?
In general, I mean, it's different for each aspect, but in general, it's mapping it out and having, you know, this overarching goal. And then it's a bit of like, yeah, cut and paste puzzle, experimenting with the ideas until, the first idea or the second idea isn't always the best. Yeah. And, you know, like I used to be really sort of, I used to put a lot of pressure on myself to always come up with something that was great straight away. But over the years, I've learned that, writing and, working on your voice is like any other practice. You just need to practice it. You just need to keep doing it. And I think you just need to be prepared that sometimes you can fail in that process or your ideas are just shit. So, yeah.
You mentioned cutting. Have you ever cut anything because you didn't feel it felt metal? Again, keeping that very, very vague, but just personally, you thought, oh, this doesn't really work in kind of a metal context for me?
I don't think so. I do, like, you know, in High Tension, I was very, even from, you know, especially the earlier albums, I was a pretty, you know, my old Ash Pegram, who I've collaborated with, you know, since I was a teenager and wrote the first two High Tension albums, can attest that I was a pretty brutal collaborator to work with, because I would just say, no, it's not brutal enough. What else have you got? And, you know, in retrospect, like, I mean, I felt that I could be honest with him. But, you know, yeah, that was a bit hard to have someone in your band not be very supportive of your ideas. But I think even back then I had already, like, you know, I have a very particular taste of especially if we're writing from, you know, guitar riffs as a starting point. And I mean, we don't always write from guitarists as a starting point, but maybe like it's, you know, 70% of the songs or whatever. So yeah, so I guess that was important for me because that is what I'm working with. So I need it. I would like it to be a particular way, or I have something envisioned. And, you know, I'm not so great at playing guitar, but somehow I've managed to be in bands for the last, you know, 15 years just by basically singing my guitar riff ideas. So I don't know.
It's an awesome skill.
It's, you know, sometimes you feel like, oh man, I'm being such a, you know, backseat driver kind of thing. But thankfully for me, my collaborators, you know, understand and support that.
Are there any kind of criteria that you use to decide like what's going to be cut, what's going to make for, you know, like the final version of the lyrics?
Yeah, I think when you kind of like have thrown everything at a song and all the aspects are complete, so to say, and if it doesn't have a particular energy, which we have done before in the last High Tension album. We like completed a full song and everyone was like, don't feel that this one belongs here, even though we had included it in our like live set a number of times. So I think that's a real luxury to be able to get to that point where, you know, you're not just trying to meet the like, you know, 30, 40 minutes duration of an album, but you can, you know, start to omit things to make things feel more cohesive or just sort of more balanced in the scheme of a body of work.
So speaking broadly, there's been a lot of research to date that has argued that metal artists often take kind of a distance from their lyrics and like singing about, you know, blood, guts, and murder, but they don't actually want to commit, you know, blood, guts, and murder. Mm-hmm. But we've actually had a number of artists we've talked to kind of disagree with that point. Where do you kind of stand in this? Do you feel that your lyrics are kind of disassociative, or do you believe do you design them to kind of be a more personal, something with, I guess, what you would call a quote unquote message?
It really depends on the song, because the beauty of making music is that there's endless possibilities. There's so many, characters you can embody. There's, maybe you're trying to honor a particular spirit or feeling. So, you have this, you have this portal to basically enter the realm and be, exercise those ideas, like express yourself in that way, because it almost feels like exciting, particularly in metal, because and I'm just speaking on behalf, like not on behalf of anyone, but I'm imagining that, for a lot of artists that love gore, it's almost like this, sphere where you can express yourself with no consequences. So I think I think metal serves that purpose, I guess, to for that kind of dark expression, I guess. But I wouldn't and I guess for myself it depends on how it depends on my response to the the resonance of that particular track, or and a thing that I've a method that really works for me is, seeing like sonic landscapes as sort of activating the mind's eye. So you can almost like envision how a song looks like, or you can sense the like how that terrain looks and what might be happening in that particular world, I guess. And just kind of taking steps into it.
So we did, of course, want to talk more specifically about your lyrics. I think we'll start with your work with High Tension, if that's all right. So your earlier album, Bully, seems to treat a variety of topics that appear relevant to personal struggles, like self and depression, in the case of songs like Take Control, or pushing through kind of personal limitations or restrictions, like in the title track Bully, which, as you said in previous interviews I read, represents your experience of facing your fears of not being taken seriously as a woman in hardcore and metal. What I found interesting kind of reading through these lyrics was that many of the songs seem to end with a sense of overcoming the difficulties. So like in Take Control, after listing all of these fears and anxieties, like the lines, I don't know what success feels like, I can't relate to anyone. You have lines like, take it all, take it back, take it slow, that seem to offer kind of a pathway to overcoming that like self-loathing and anxiety. And this isn't something that we often see in metal. Like, certainly we see a lot of metal lyrics discussing themes of like self-loathing and depression, but we don't necessarily see that kind of positive expression towards the end. So why did you decide to explore these personal challenges, and why was it kind of important for you to talk about overcoming them?
I think there's a strong correlation with using your voice and overcoming things that feel confronting, whether that's within yourself or otherwise. And I think I think that it's important, you know, like I use music and songwriting as this sort of as this vessel to muster that energy, to push through, or you know, or just as a tool really to reconcile and kind of put everything out. You know, I think it's a really useful process, and I think doing it through the medium of music, you know, I guess when you're sort of unraveling complex things, it can be really overwhelming. There's so many nuances. There's like, you know, like it's kind of just a mess. So having the structure of music and, you know, crafting even like vocal patterns and so forth almost kind of helps organize everything. And I guess you do want to have, well, me personally, you want to have a positive outcome from it. And that's also like organically what I get out of, you know, being a music fan as well. So
is there anything like scary, or did you find any hesitation on the first times you kind of tried putting this more personal stories into metal, in terms of either just like exposing yourself or worry that maybe people wouldn't connect? Were these like, what was it like kind of being personal in that way and putting your experiences out on the page?
I think that I think the beauty of abrasive and harsh singing is that not everyone can decipher what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So I think that for a lot of, maybe not just for myself, but maybe for other singers, it's this really kind of protective abstraction. Mm-hmm. So even though I know like people can probably access the lyrics and have a understanding of the raw, I guess, you know, the rawness of like, and this is in the context of bully. It's not as the performer, it's not as confronting to me because I have that abstraction of extreme vocals. And it's the same for I guess the preceding album, because but for Purge, I guess it sort of had much more of a purpose. I'm not, you know, like it feels like so long ago that we wrote Bully as well. And you know, like I'm in my like late 30s now, and I guess it's sort of like, it's interesting to see the previous albums, and they're sort of just markers of time for me. But I think, you know, even when Jess was reading out the thing, I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that. Like, you know, trying to suppress the kind of processes I went through, you know, from 10 years ago or whatever.
It's like when we read things we wrote 5 years ago, it doesn't feel like,
yeah. But, you know, you just gotta, like, I guess you've just got to own it, I guess. Mm-hmm. I remember being like 12 and seeing my diary from when I was like 9 or 10, and I was so repulsed that I literally burnt it and chucked it in the bin.
Wow.
And I think, I think a lot of artists can feel that way about, not that I was an artist when I was a child, but, you know, I think a lot of people can be, you know, like cringing at themselves.
Yeah. Life, right? A perpetual series of looking back and cringing.
Yeah. Absolutely. But that's not to say, you know, I feel that way about those albums, but it reminds you of I guess, you know, who you were, or like what kind of like things you chose to to address at the time, I guess. So yeah.
Well, what about in contrast to the songs that Jess mentioned, you have songs that you've talked about that are a bit more kind of brutal and dark. Songs like Iceman, Killed by Life, that have lines that reference like destined to dissolve, destined to rot, and respectively finished with words crumbled and defeated. Are these kind of songs that seem a bit more, I guess, like on face value at least, hopeless, intentionally meant to be juxtaposed by the ones that kind of talk about overcoming difficulties on the same albums?
Killed by Life is actually meant to be a really positive album. I mean, positive song. And yeah, hopefully it doesn't come across that way. But whenever when we used to perform that song, it had a really positive vibe. And actually the intent of those lyrics were meant to be, positive, the opposite.
Okay.
And Iceman was quite a fun one. Again, it's like that was quite a abstract method of writing as well, like literally abstract, not just sung with abstraction.
Is it like positive in the sense that, like, I suppose like one way I could read Killed by Life is that like positive in the sense of like embracing mortality? Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think a lot of, the lyrics in Bully is just sort of like, it's like meant to humanize the process of living, I guess, existing. Yeah.
That was interesting. Obviously, like, yeah, I think like both readings are very like possible here. Maybe in the context of performance, like, it leans more one way than the other. And I certainly saw the humor in Iceman when I read it, particularly because it reminded me a little bit of what other lyricists we've spoken to have talked about, like regarding the brutality of the mundane. So things like, like affirmations, father figure, typical totems in my wholesome home, hobbies on weekends, I think was like, that really came through a little bit for me. Is that what you intended?
So actually, when I wrote Iceman, Iceman is reference to the Iceman, the hitman, who had murdered a lot of people, and his family just had no idea that was his role. So that was, to be honest, that was just like a really quick, because it was like this Iceman was this sort of fast, grindy sort of song. And it was sort of just like this, envisioning being Iceman, what having to lie to your family and sort of like have this kind of veil of normalcy,
right,
whilst simultaneously having to be so disassociative, like, I don't know, to be a hitman. One of my favorite series is called Barry, so like that's written after, like, obviously Barry came out after we wrote Iceman. So I guess that was just like a very kind of minuscule like interest in like, kind of like a fleeting moment of interest of like, Iceman, let's quickly explore this character.
Yeah, I mean, one of your more enduring interests, I think, like certainly comes across in some of the songs on Bully as well, which, if I'm reading them correctly, seem to reference, the Indonesian genocide. So, for instance, Mass Grave. I don't know if like that's necessarily what you intended, but I think like looking at it from the perspective of like Purge coming straight after, I wondered if there was that kind of connection there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that enduring interest that you describe, I guess it's, like it's a constant work in progress. When I first found out about the anti-communist purge, I was already in my 20s, and I was already in another project before High Tension. So I'd begun addressing this particular era, because for me, it was such a profound piece of history that I feel is so corollary to present day Indonesia, that it was, yeah, it was this kind of like extremely overwhelming, profound piece. And I felt really betrayed by, you know, the Indonesia school curriculum and the, you know, the Suharto government, because this was omitted from, you know, from the education curriculum, and it's not known. And there's still, you know, I talk about this a lot, but there's still so much stigma around being affiliated with the Indonesian Communist Party. And so it's this like incredibly, you know, and yeah, it's this vast, incredibly messy aspect that's been of Indonesia's history that has been suppressed. So from, I can't remember when that album came out, but from 2000, maybe 2007 up until now, that's a current theme that is, I wouldn't even say theme, but, you know, that's something that's constantly being explored and expressed. So in my first project, and then before High Tension, and even the first High Tension album, the second one, Bully, so Death Beat, Bully, and Purge. I recall High Tension played at South by Southwest in like 2014. I think Death Beat, the first album. So we're performing songs from that album. And a friend of Matt Weston's, who attended the show, this is the first time that I'd ever experienced this, because I've, you know, been performing for years and addressing the anti-communist genocide. And straight up, he was like, hey, that song Without Us, were you talking about the anti-communist purge in 1965? And I was like, whoa.
Okay.
And he hadn't listened to like the recorded version, but he had a really incredible knowledge of that particular era in history, Cold War, 1965, 1966 in Indonesia. Obviously, there's like parallels in South America as well. And he happened to be, very knowledgeable on the topic, and had, he'd played in bands as well, but he also, oh my gosh, I can't remember the name of the radio, it's like an independent radio in LA, and they've been around for decades, but they, so anyway, that was particularly like exciting for me. Like I felt really heard. Because previously, until then, you know, I wasn't being explicit at all and that was also a very, that lack of explicit, sorry, English is my second language. Is that a word?
Explicitness,
I think, yeah.
Yeah, that lack of explicitness was very much intentional as well. So yeah, not just in the delivery, but in the way that the lyrics were composed too.
And this is the case for the songs on Bully? You mean like Mass Graves?
Almost like every song.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's interesting you say that, because I mean, I did think that maybe because of my familiarity with that historical context, that the songs off Purge were kind of more directly tackling the events tied to, you know, the 65-66 communist purge that marked the transition to the New Order regime. Is that what you intended? Like, did you intend to be more direct about it?
I didn't intentionally mean to be more direct about it, but there were a lot of revelations that happened in the process of making Purge. And it was also, you know, like, I guess I had dabbled in addressing them in the previous 3 albums, that I felt that it was time, and that there was so much more that I needed to write about. And that was also, you know, leading up to writing for Purge, I'd also had been, you know, traveling a lot to Indonesia. I started like an oral history project and gathered a lot of stories. And, you know, my main concern was that a lot of the survivors or people that still remember what happened in that era, you know, they don't have that much time left, you know, and let alone recalling these like memories. And at the same time, you know, like throughout this process, I also met, there's this incredible collective called 1965, 1965 Tiap Hari, which means 1965 every day. And, you know, that's a collective of poets and academics, visual artists, multimedia artists, writers. And, you know, they, you know, the whole purpose of 1965 every day was to share a story about 1965 every day. And the song Ghost to Ghost is a direct inspiration from their practice of dari hantu ke hantu is how they describe like keeping these memories alive so they're not forgotten. And, you know, I guess like indirectly, that's what I'd sort of done for myself over the past decade, 15 years. Close to, for the past 15 years, and gathering as much information as I can and, you know, documenting these stories. I said, and initially just for myself. So I guess, you know, and a lot of these factors and these like breakthroughs in information, because it was so difficult to find any information 15 years ago, that I guess just organically that became a really important, it became a really important thing, even more profoundly to start reconciling.
Do you hope fans use your lyrics as kind of a jumping point to learn more about this? Because we did notice that, you know, in reading the lyrics for a lot of songs, we did see these themes kind of coming up, and, you know, Jess especially was able to make the kind of connections you're talking about. But we also noted that there's lines like red, white, shame, which we assumed references the Indonesian flag, but there's no like specific identification of Suharto, no specific mention of like military dictatorship. Is there an intention in keeping things a bit vague or broad, or like what would have happened if it was explicit, or kind of what was the artistic thinking in the framing that you chose to investigate these?
I definitely think in music, you know, it's up to the participant, like whether you're like a listener, to be able to interpret things for yourself. And I don't feel like that it's my role as the performer to give a lecture or tell people, you know, or to be like overly explicit with things. And, you know, maybe that's a stylistic choice as well, because, you know, you want, you know, stylistically, you want the lyrical content to fit with the spirit of, you know, the riffs and you know, the song as a whole. So sometimes, I don't know, I don't like to be overly explicit in my lyrics. But to me, it makes sense.
Right.
to me, it's I guess it's somewhat explicit, but I don't think that I don't need to say Suharto's name to know that there is this kind of like overwhelming repulsion. It's better that I, you know, keep his name out of it, because it's not even just particularly about what he did or his legacy, but it's everything that era represented and how that has impacted modern day Indonesia. But in general, like red, white, shame is like, it's like a repulsion against capitalism. You know, in my mind, and it's sort of this sort of like grieving process of like, you know, like I grew up I grew up as a Muslim, and you know, I learned Arabic at the same time as I learned the alphabet. And one of the things, like, I remember, like, you know, when you're learning about the levels of hell, so, you know, that first line of being really descriptive in the forms of torture that was happening was very much like kind of bringing in, you know, that mind's eye into like standing in, you know, one of hell's deeper levels, and what you would do at that point, and how that, I guess, made you feel.
Okay. What about like you have some songs that talk about the Australian context as well, right? Like, again, I could be misinterpreting, but Lucky Country Part 2, for instance, like
Yep.
Yeah. What I guess, when do you, is it a different process? Like, what kind of inspired you to visit kind of Australia as a topic?
Well, I guess it feels intrinsic to me because I'm an immigrant, and living on stolen land. There's a lot of, there's a lot to unravel in that experience of you know, just those two things. And I guess Lucky Country is about like, you know, the process of assimilating. And I actually haven't listened to that song for quite some time, but I guess it's sort of like a brief sort of address of, you know, that sort of experience of coming to Australia, like not just for myself, like not just my personal experience as an immigrant, but you know, the way that this country treats asylum seekers and refugees. So I guess it's just sort of like, sort of a brief kind of address on this kind of irony.
I'm actually really happy because that was my guess on what it was about.
Well done.
I think I got that one. I completely
tried to give it away in the title.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the themes you're talking about, that I completely butchered the previous one, so I'm glad I got that one right.
This should be a game show.
Yeah, absolutely.
What could this song be about? And it's like that "Would I Lie to You" format, you know?
Yeah. Could
be good. Good idea.
Next time,
absolutely, yeah. We're not a podcast, we're a game show now.
Well, if we can talk about like Bully and Purge together, it seems like the lyrical content of songs off both albums like seem very relevant to your own kind of personal struggles, and I suppose we could even say trauma in the case of the 65-66 killings. Do you think that there's something about metal music that makes it more like of a suitable medium for working through like difficulties and trauma?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, I mean, for me personally, it's those multiple forms of abstraction, because, you know, like I grew up in Indonesia where it was sort of like there was this fear sort of instilled if we spoke out against the government. You know, I remember one of the earliest memories is like this woman that was kidnapped because she protested, and she was, you know, jailed for, you know, she went missing. And obviously the history is right there to show you that writers and thinkers that spoke out were eliminated and they went missing, and or you couldn't access their works, like Pramudiana Tatur and Wiji Tukul, like, you know, Pramudia is like one of the, you know, like I just think it's such a missed opportunity. It's such a, like, you know, if I had access to his writings when I was a teenager, I almost like, you know, I always envision how that would influence me in those, like, it would have been so helpful. You know, it was such a vital tool for any young Indonesian person to be able to like immerse themselves in. So well, I guess what I'm trying to say is like for me personally, being able to address these topics that would have gotten me in trouble had I been in Indonesia, or maybe people didn't understand what, you know, I'm sure it's like actually fine now, But for many, many years, that was just this kind of like this fear of like getting in trouble, or this fear of like, there was always like this sense of like, you need to be apolitical to keep yourself safe. And, you know, look at what happens to the people that rebel, or they're you know, it took a little while to unlearn that influence. And also, I guess when you sort of like getting back to like expressing yourself a bit more freely from a political sense, it's, you know, and you're carrying this like, oh, don't say anything that's gonna like put anybody, you know, in danger. It's like, actually, even talking about 1965 still has implications. It's still not you know, it's just not something that you can easily talk about without any sort of challenges. There's still, you know, people are still getting like, conferences are getting shut down when they, you know, when writers and thinkers are trying to get together to address 1965. So, you know, there's still this stigma that's like a lot of 1965 survivors are getting excluded from society. And, you know, like even the thought of like, you know, in my like oral history interviews, I found out that, and you know, and I did some extra research after like collecting the firsthand stories of this exclusion from community and from being community leaders or having any sort of public influence. There was a list of occupations that 1965 survivors and their children and grandchildren couldn't participate in if they had any sort of affiliation with the Indonesian Communist Party. Like, you couldn't be a teacher, you couldn't work for the public service, couldn't work for the army, you couldn't be, you know, the head of your neighborhood. You couldn't even be a shadow puppet master, a dalang, because, you know, they're considered to have such public influence. So I think that's a really interesting sort of like, and this was so successfully executed. It was in government forms, you know. So one of the stories that really resonated with me was a person that I interviewed recalled their mother's hand would shake every time they had to tick a box on a government form to indicate whether or not they had any affiliation with their family had any affiliation with the Indonesian Communist Party. And because they, you know, she would have to lie. And I didn't realize it was to the extent of like the bureaucracy. And, you know, you speak to people now who might have lied their whole lives and they're still afraid.
We noticed in this kind of exploration of fear and trauma, a theme that, I guess, I'm not sure a theme, but a motif, an image that comes up a lot, especially on Purge, is graves or burial. You have lines like "Bury me deep, hot, raw, and red," and "Ghost to Ghost." You cannot lay to rest as long as fear is your guest on Ular. I lay decayed, flesh scraped clean on Rise. Is there a reason that this kind of image of somebody being put to rest or being buried keeps coming up in your lyrics? Is it something you're aware of, or is it something that has kind of distinct purposes depending on the song that you're writing?
So I don't know, your question just really got me there.
We can skip it if it's...
if you don't want to discuss it, it's totally fine. We can skip.
Sorry about that.
I'm sorry. Like, we should have said
we
should have said at the beginning of the interview, like, if there's any questions that we ask that you're not comfortable answering, like, please tell us. We're happy to move to something else. You know, we don't want you to be uncomfortable.
I wasn't uncomfortable. I was just like, sometimes I don't cry often in interviews. Thankfully. But sometimes something would just like kind of strike might just feel a bit triggered or something. But
of course.
So I guess in terms of the motif, as you had described, it's difficult to know where to start, but maybe the essence is that one of the most dehumanizing things you can do is take away like that, take away a family's right to say goodbye to their loved ones or bury their loved ones properly, and follow the proper ritual to bury someone. And I guess during 1965 to 1966, the amount of people that were killed was, it was so vast. They estimate between 600,000 to 1 million people. And more recently, I was part of a symposium, and this artist, Tintin Wulia, had this sort of, I guess, a game that she led with the rest of the participants. And it was about like kind of piecing together memories. And one of the memories that was shared was a woman had witnessed the slayings of hundreds of people. So she, judging from maybe her age, maybe she would have been only a teenager. And it happened in the center of in Kebun Raya Bogor, which is the Bogor Botanical Gardens. And I had been there as a child and always felt a bit like, it was just a very like cold. I mean, Bogor is much colder than the rest of Jakarta, but it always felt cold and unsettling. And when she described that, and she basically said that she had witnessed hundreds of people being slaughtered, and the fish pond that was in the center of the garden became their gravesite. And this was like, hundreds of people in the one place. And so I guess like this sort of like with Ghost to Ghost, it was, I guess the realm that I had entered is like what, I guess it's trying to address, these missed opportunities, these like every person there has like a family, and they have, just unwittingly been so dehumanized in this process of, how they died. And I often think about like, I guess when you're being buried in the ground and how that sort of makes you, return to earth essentially, and just be a part of earth again. I guess that was sort of like the significance of addressing the, deeply dehumanizing aspect of these grave sites.
So, thank you for explaining that. An interesting kind of pattern that I observed, like just looking across the two albums, was that, whilst Bully features about like 23 instances of the pronoun I, appearing across like 5 songs in the album, Purge has only 5 instances of I. Instead, there are considerably more instances of we, so about 19. Was the switch to we in place of I like a conscious component of the writing about these like kind of, as you say, like very significant large-scale historical events that have impacted an enormous number of people?
Yeah, I think so. I think perhaps the approach feels more collective, and that and it's not something that's unique to my personal experience. So I guess there was an intention there with removing it from from myself, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, like, do you view yourself then as like a component of this larger we category, like the collective of people who have this connection to the killings?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, it's not even geographically bound to Indonesia, because this occurred in so many other places around the world. Yeah,
for sure.
So I think that it's difficult to comprehend how. I think it's difficult to comprehend how these events could have happened, and it's even more of an insult to injury that history has been suppressed, and even to this day is not acknowledged by everybody, especially the Indonesian government. And I think it's also important that these stories are told from, these stories are ours to tell, or these memories are ours to uphold, because it's such a potent part of where we are at present. And it does really irk me when for example the Joshua Oppenheimer films around the the act of killing and the one after that, it infuriated a lot of Indonesians, because it was such an unethical way to address these events, and it was presented without nuance, and especially in the first one, and it was just told through such a it was just told through the like a colonial lens, I guess. I don't know, for lack of a better term. I actually hate talking about it, because it was just so frustrating to see that. And actually the impact of him doing these documentaries makes it really difficult for other thinkers, academics, documentary filmmakers and artists to tell the story of 1965, from an Indonesian perspective. So anyway.
Yeah. I feel bad because our next question kind of doesn't have is we're doing some pretty deep, interesting, heavy content here. Our next question is just kind of a framing one. So apologies for the really poor transition here. But in general, in the way that you've approached kind of these stories and all the stories you tell in your lyrics, we noticed that there's a bit of a trend towards very straightforward and direct language. We mentioned Red, White, Shame as a song, but it has lyrics like, if I met you in hell, would I join in? Would I partake in this ritual of sin? That includes vocabulary that, you could hear in kind of day-to-day life. And throughout Bully and Purge, there are very rarely words that are more than 2 syllables long. And of course, the album titles are also quite punchy, one word, very, very kind of strong, impactful terms. Are you conscious of this pattern? Did you intend to, or have you consciously avoided kind of the 4-syllable words that are stereotypical of certain types of metal? Or is it just something that kind of happened as you found yourself exploring these various, the themes that you've been so kind to share with us so far?
Definitely didn't make a conscious decision to omit too many syllables. But I guess as I sort of vaguely explained before, I guess it's just what lyrical content shows themselves. And I guess my priority is that it's fitting with the rest of the music, and that could be in the amount of syllables, but also literally the shape of the mouth as it's projected. So particular tones, particular vowels will get you deeper tones and so forth. So I guess a lot of the lyrical components, has been fairly secondary, and I don't think that it's not like a priority for me to be overly eloquent in the lyrical components, because the main purpose of the execution of these songs is that vocally it carries the spirit of, you know, everything else, like the content. So I think, you know, like the music is language in itself. So there's not this kind of like unnecessary intervention with lyrical content that's really needed.
Just sorry, I'm going to toss this question to you because I will not pronounce it right.
One thing I did notice on the when I was looking at the titles from Purge is that although, you know, everything we've talked about so far has been in English, there is one very notable Indonesian title among the tracks on Purge, which is Ular. So I was wondering, why did you decide to use an Indonesian title for this particular song? And it means snake for those playing at home.
I think it was just sort of like, oh my gosh. So I don't know if a lot of bands have this as well, but usually up until like you're printing the vinyl, it's all working titles, right? And they're just silliest working titles. So sometimes like finding the title can be, you know, like, you know, it's at the final step. And I also like to be, you know, like, I think it's important that the rest of the members also like those titles. Like, so it's not just about like me going, this is the title, and being really, you know, pedantic about that. So I did choose Ular because the, you know, it's in line with the theme of, I shouldn't say theme, but it's in line with the spirit of the album. And I guess its significance, which I also kind of was a really coincidental, was that this one's not so coincidental, but there was a river that was described as Sungai Ular. I can't recall exactly the exact name that, and this was a river where a lot of the bodies were disposed. And the year 1965, so that, you know, 1965, 1966 was also in the Chinese calendar. I don't have any Chinese heritage, but you know, there's a lot of Peranakan influence and culture in Indonesia, of course, and so that was also the year of the snake in the lunar calendar. I think it was even in the element of metal, so I think it was the year of the metal snake. I have to double check.
Oh, that's kind of a
interesting, yeah,
nice little overlap, metal.
And the snake on the cover of Purge, that was also coincidental. So that all sort of like, I don't know, it was like it was meant to be or something.
Yeah, for sure. One other little choice you made that is kind of surprising because we are an extreme metal podcast, but we haven't talked to many people that have like any swearing in their lyrics, and you have a little bit. Most of it is, there's nothing on Purge. There's no swear words whatsoever. But Bully does have some swear words scattered throughout, most prominently on the title track, which has things like shit on your game, hear the girls fucking talk shit, which, you know, pretty straightforward example. I guess for you, what is the value of curse words, quote unquote, in lyrics?
I think for that album, it sort of did the job in delivering a particular attitude. I guess, but really that is the purpose. But you know what, having explicit lyrics in your, you know, when you have that sticker, it actually makes it really difficult for broadcast. I remember when we were contacted by the BBC and they wanted to play one of a song from the first album, and they asked us, even though you couldn't hear it in the song itself, they asked us for the lyrics, and they said, oh, we can't play this one because of this word. And then that sort of made me think, it's like, oh, you know, this is like really impractical. And often, you know, over the years, I realized like you don't need curse words to make an impact.
And so is that the reason why you've kind of like shied away from the use of like swearing on Purge and presumably more recent work?
Yeah, I think it's like sort of, I guess like the first two High Tension albums had a bit more of a like punk spirit, and you know, like, you know, you can get away with you know, being really abrasive in that context. But I guess, you know, by the time, I also, I was like really, I felt like I felt like a totally different sphere entering into the third album, and there was a different sense in the writing approach that felt, you know, a bit more vast and bigger than my initial approach to writing, which was, you know, a bit more personal and internal, and this is sort of more sort of like expansive and with this sort of collective mindset that it felt like it wasn't necessary, and in fact it would feel like it was a bit dishonorable or something.
So of course we also want to talk about your lyrics from your other project, Rinuwat. You're the first band that we've talked to, at least on the podcast, that uses Indonesian languages, including Indonesian and Bahasa Kawi, so Old Javanese, in the lyrics. So we wanted to ask what it's like writing metal lyrics in Indonesian and Old Javanese, and you know, what the process is like in comparison to, you know, the process of writing lyrics in English.
Absolutely. So English is my second language. I only learned how to speak English when I was 8. And I never learned how to speak Javanese, even though both my parents are from Central Java. You know, recently I found, you know, and I didn't know this about Bahasa Indonesia. So my first language is lingua franca. So it's not even a pure language. And I felt a bit gypped, to be honest, because, well, I think it's quite profound, because old languages, I feel, is sort of this portal to old knowledge and power. And there's so much to be like, there's so much of it that I don't know, and I never got to fully study it and speak it growing up, that, you know, studying it on my own terms in my 30s is, you know, feels like I'm connecting back to that ancestral lineage, or I want to know more about the antecedent conditions of, you know, like my heritage, I guess. So, and I guess what inspired me is, you know, living on unceded Wurundjeri country, we have this sort of lack of knowledge of country, and we have a lack, you know, even for a lot of like Wurundjeri people that are Woiwurrung or Bunwurrung, it's actually really difficult to access, you know, learning these languages as well. But they hold so much knowledge and so much stories and wisdom and all of these, you know, like really important aspects in terms of understanding your culture, your history, and so forth. So I think it was this year, I met Auntie, so Nawi Carolyn Briggs, who is a Bunwurrung elder. And Nawi Carolyn did a very, very intimate welcome to country. This is through a friend of mine who is an artist. Their name's Bon Mott. And that was like a really generous kind of like being invited to hear Nawi Carolyn welcome us to country. And so I think she's just completed her thesis on language. And one thing that really resonated with me was, I think she was basically telling a story of like her supervisor saying, you should have written this in Sanskrit or Arabic, because, you know, why did you write it in English in terms of the correct pronunciation of the Bunwurrung language? And that sort of made me think. I was like, oh, you know, Auntie Carolyn, I actually learned, you know, I learned how to write and speak Arabic at the same time as I was learning Bahasa Indonesia, and also because I was studying Bahasa Kawi from, you know, the Sanskrit influence and all of this stuff. So it just sort of made me think about like old languages and why it's so important to like have this kind of comprehension. And also it's like really fascinating. And I guess to properly answer your question, Jess, what's it like to sing and write in these languages? So for Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Kawi, even though, you know, I never spoke Bahasa Kawi, and not many, like, I mean, unless you're from the Kraton or you don't really, you won't be able to find many people even in Java nowadays, but unless you're like a pawang or something, like a shaman. But I found it felt more natural to use my voice with how these languages sound. And from like an improvisation approach as well, because I guess when if you've ever sort of like tried to completely improvise, for me, the times that I've performed at Make It Up Club or have done improvised performances, I'm improvising in Bahasa Indonesia, or the tones and the vowels and the r. It's like, you know, the rolling of the R's in particular words actually sounds so much more brutal and satisfying when it's executed in an extreme metal sense. So there's a lot of, I guess, like writing but particularly performing in Bahasa Indonesia and Bahasa Kawi, is that it's almost like I had a spectrum of colors to use in my vocal practice, and now it's like really expanded. You know, there's so many more possibilities, and but it's what can be achieved in terms of like the rolling of the R's, like the amount of O's and the tonal kind of possibilities and textures is a lot richer, I guess.
It's really interesting because, like, I, when listening to the album, I obviously didn't understand. I don't know any of the words or anything like that, but the sounds you're talking about, like, I was very, very noticed. Like, I'm very fixated on how just brutal it sounded. Like, I didn't know if you were pronouncing things quote unquote correctly or if you'd adjusted it to be more heavy. But there's just kind of like a growling heaviness to like everything you were saying on every track that I think comes through. Just kind of this. It just sounds like there's a feeling of like anger, but also just kind of this overwhelming, like crushing, like I want to say like a cursed kind of feeling that I got out of it. I like, is the pronunciation quote unquote, normal, or is it adjusted to kind of make it that kind of just produce that feel?
I would say that I didn't adjust the pronunciation of things. Mm-hmm. Rama said something really interesting when we were like working on like the Gamelan stuff. He's like, yeah, but Indonesian just sounds brutal in general. Like he said, perpustakaan is like library, it just sounds so much more like grand and like heavy.
Library.
Yeah. So there are particular words that lends like is more leaning to this heavy spectre. And it just I guess it's like it depends on the word, but I wasn't changing the pronunciation of things. And in fact, I would say that a lot of the words are still pretty legible, because I was able to enunciate particular words a bit more than sort of like, it was, it's still abrasive, and there's still that form of abstraction, but maybe for an Indonesian, someone that can speak Indonesian, maybe they'll be able, and loves extreme metal. Sure. I think they would be able to figure it out.
Did you reference or like listen to any other, because for people who don't know, like Indonesia does have a pretty active metal scene, especially a grindcore. Did you listen to or reference what other Indonesian artists were doing, or did you kind of just explore this on your own?
I do. I have a lot of, I love a lot of Indonesian metal. But the metal bands that I like from Indonesia are use English in their lyrics most of the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't listen to, apart from Senyawa, because, their album Sujud was definitely one of my favorites. I didn't, and, Ruli doesn't sing in that kind of extreme metal style, but his voice is so heavy and rich and nuanced and tactile, like all those descriptions of like, it's like there's like a whole universe in his voice. And he does sing in Bahasa Indonesia, but I guess I was, I didn't want to be directly influenced, obviously, but I guess that was, I think, in the context of performing in the different language that isn't English, felt like a new revelation, because previously, I guess, like in the process of assimilation and being an immigrant, I worked so hard to learn how to speak English and to lose my accent, and, like with the English language also, from an immigrant's experience comes like a sense of belonging, and, things are much easier when you can speak English and so forth. So there was many, many years of abandoning my first language. I guess like perhaps that could be the same for like a lot of like Indonesian artists, because they like, even though metal is so fertile and it has always been a popular genre in Indonesia, and it's informed by so many different factors, maybe there is still this sense of like the songs have to be performed in English to fit within the genre, perhaps. But not all Indonesian, metal acts are performing their songs in English. Like I'm noticing a lot more. I'm definitely noticing after we had written the album, I sort of did a bit more research about seeing because I haven't lived back in Indonesia for many, many years, and it's really good. It's really good when artists can take that sort of agency and, work with what they've got. I think it's so much more powerful. And also like in terms of like these like parameters of style and in extreme metal, you actually, if you're an Indonesian artist, or if you grew up in Indonesia, you don't actually have to look outside of your country to be so metal. It's so metal.
For sure.
Definitely. And certainly your comments are certainly reflected in a lot of the interviews I've done with Indonesian metal musicians who have said that like they did feel pressure to write in English in order to connect with the international scene. But that, yeah, as you said as well, there were certainly some that I spoke to that, viewed using Indonesian languages, even older Indonesian languages. Like, I don't know how familiar we are with Jasad.
Oh, Jasad, yeah.
Yeah, Jasad, yeah. Yeah, I spoke to
They're
Man
so
Jasad.
good.
Yeah, they're brilliant. And, for those that don't know, they write a lot in Indonesian, but also Bahasa Sunda and Bahasa Sunda Kuno. So Sundanese and Old Sundanese, and they draw a lot. It's very similar to yourself on like traditional skripsi, like scripts and stuff. Yeah. So
I love that band Jasad. So then they have that like really incredible side project that Rama showed me, Rama, who's in Rinuwat and Kilat, where it's called Karinding Attack. And it's with the karinding instrument. But the other thing that is amazing about Jasad is Man, he performs with the totopong, like the scarf, and he's just chain smoking the whole time. It's the most Indonesian metal thing. If we were to kind of like paint a picture of this like quintessential intersection of metal and Sundanese culture. So I think that's incredible, and imagine the impact that would make to all these sort of like emerging artists, to see someone take ownership of their culture. And I think it is this sense of belonging, or like being acknowledged by the international scene, that is, I think a lot of like Indonesians artists is like, oh yeah, no, we don't have to like appease anyone,
Yeah.
And it's a sick scene. Like, I feel like you haven't really I don't know, I hope I'm not being biased here, but I feel like you haven't lived as a heavy music fan unless you've been to a show in Indonesia, because it's like insane.
It's definitely on the list as soon as we can go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose something else we should talk about, as you've already mentioned it, was the influence of gamelan notation, because of course, like for those that don't know, gamelan notation draws on traditions of like ensemble music in Indonesia, but it is quite an unusual element to see featured in metal music. So we're wondering, was it difficult to incorporate like these styles, and how did this impact your lyric writing?
So one of the most difficult things was to actually have access to the gamelan, full stop, in Melbourne. Even in Indonesia, like, you have to, not anyone can just like whip up a gamelan. You have to come from like a bloodline, and it depends on like where the, you can't just assemble like gamelan from this village in Java and that village in Java and expect for it to work, because they're all sort of like, it's like this, it has been created specifically for that region, and is delivered as this like ensemble kind of thing. So that was the most challenging aspect, was actually being able to get a hold of the gamelan instruments. And but when it did finally happen, which felt pretty magical, it was so incredible to be like to write with gamelan, because the resonance, like the sonic resonance of each instrument, like the gong, and we use Balinese gamelan, so gangsa, gong gede, the pomade, like all of those things, like it's a resonance that travels through your body. And if you look at the history of gamelan and why it was created, like the gong gede was the first instrument to be created, and the purpose was so mere mortals could communicate to the gods. And it evolved because we wanted to articulate our message. So it was, starting with the gonga and then another instrument and another thing. And it's something that has to be played together. So using the instruments and using gamelan and having that knowledge of its significance to Balinese culture and Javanese culture and its importance in storytelling, whether it was with wayang or with traditional dance, even just having that kind of presence was particularly influential in the writing process. So, but because we didn't, we were approaching it from an experimental sense, I guess we were making things that didn't involve like every single gamelan player. So it really stripped back the composition and in terms of like the articulation, say if like, I don't know the way you put it, like if a whole ensemble could communicate like, a thesis to the gods, we were merely sort of like, delivering something abstract and not hyper articulated. But I think for us, we also wanted, we have the song Nagaloka. So that composition was based on the way, like in Balinese gamelan, there's almost like a blast beat, but it's using like the fast syncopation of cheng cheng, which is the little cymbals, and other aspects of the gamelan that's just played really fast. So we sort of approached it in that sense, like what if instead of doing like a black metal double kick blast beat, we applied that with gamelan, and also with suling. Like the suling is often the bamboo flute is often like used in lieu of a voice. So then I guess it's just sort of like experimenting those ideas of that is informed by traditional practice and traditional knowledge, but experimenting with them, and I didn't actually feel that we had to try too hard to make things feel heavy, because we use a lot of the gong de, and that's like literally the heaviest thing that you could feel. It does. I think what we struggled with was like capturing it on recording because it's just one of those things where it's just an instrument where you need to be present. And I guess like maybe it would be the same of like feeling the resonance of a live show through amplifiers and feeling the bottom end like travel through your body.
Right.
But this is an ancient instrument that holds so much resonance. It's actually, it's pretty gnarly. It's such a special, it's a special experience.
Was there anything like, I guess like obviously there's all this overlap that you're mentioning in terms of sound, like, blast beats kind of existing in there, but was there any initial clash, even just in your brain at all, like taking something localized and traditional and mixing it with something that is, I guess, quite international and, has actually traditionally opposed itself or been viewed as opposed to tradition and, the old way, or did it just kind of slip in together?
So there were times when like, like I had written this kind of like, not set of rules, but I had like a list of ideas to explore. And one of them was like adapting the tuning of the guitar like pelog or slendro, which is the way that the gamelan, like the pentatonic scale, for example. But that idea, like when we tried that, was like, yeah, nah, that doesn't work. It's just, you know what I mean? So you kind of, you just have to go through the process of, so that was probably one example, but then other examples, like some things just worked, I guess. And I think that, I guess the way I like could describe it is like simultaneous feelings of discovery, but also familiarity, because for Rama and I, he grew up learning gamelan from his father, who was a pamade, the like lead player. And even though he wasn't born in Bali, he grew up with that. I grew up learning traditional dance, and so all of the like the sounds of the gamelan, even though they, you know, I'd never played, you know, I never experimented with gamelan until last year. It just, you know, it feels natural because it's sort of like what I had grown up with, I guess. But, you know, not every, as I said, not every idea worked. But I guess it was that combination of the familiarity with gamelan itself, whether or not that was direct as a performer or just as a, you know, someone like me who led traditional dance to gamelan, but have never played gamelan. In fact, I remember learning gamelan when I was a child, and the teacher was like, "You're no good at gamelan." So that really like turned me off. But what he didn't know was that you can be shit when you start something new. So I wish I didn't take it to heart, his comment, but.
So you're always shit when you start something new.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, Rama is a drum teacher, so he has this like patience like no one else. And anytime I would be like, "Nah, I can't do this," he'd be like, "No, do it this way," or like, everybody has natural rhythm, and, you know, very encouraging stuff. So I think that was I think the actual process of learning something for yourself was really important. But and Mike Deslons, who produced the Rinuwat album, it was actually really good to have someone that didn't have this like innate connection already, because it was going to be such a central part of Rinuwat. And I guess he also had like his own vision of, you know, what it could be. And actually he describes it really well. It's like, because he produces he produces bands for a living, and is a sound engineer. He's incredibly talented at that, but he's also an incredible songwriter. He plays in another band called Ilva, which I'm a big fan of. And, you know, he's taught me a lot about being methodical and being really kind of disciplined in writing. And he's basically said, like, over time things just reveal themselves. Like when you get to that part of the process, things will eventually reveal themselves. So like trusting in that. And also because, you know, having two other people collaborating with, like, it was a really enriching experience for me, because we all trusted each other in our contribution to the work.
We noticed some other like kind of traditional elements, like use of references to terms for traditional weaponry, traditional like evil spirits, temples, the term for the first month of the Islamic calendar, like witch doctor, kind of these kind of terms, and also just the use of, you know, old Javanese in general, all kind of fitting in the same motive that you just discussed. Terms that are still contemporary Javanese, but you might not hear in day-to-day life, I guess.
I think that I think it's a really fascinating aspect of Javanese culture that, you know, like if you had when my first band toured Indonesia, for example, and we toured all through Java, and each town that we went to, we engaged a pawang hujan, which is, I don't know, I explain it to my Australian friends as like a rain repeller or a rain shaman, basically. And that was an integral part for the tour manager to include in the itineraries, because it meant that for most of our shows that were held outdoors, we wouldn't have the burden of bad weather. So, you know, this is like a really common practice. As well as like the Javanese calendar of like the market days and the particular pairings of days and their significance. For example, Selasa Kliwon and Jumat Kliwon, those are particularly, so the days of the Gregorian calendar paired, if it's paired with the market day of the Javanese calendar, when paired together, they have like an auspicious quality to them. So that's when you perform your rituals, preferably at the confluence of two rivers for maximum potency. So like it is like, you know, and trying to like sort of growing up in Indonesia and like, and my grandmother who knew a lot about Javanese ritualistic practice in her work, she was a Perias Pengantin, which is, I feel like you can't, it's not the same when you translate it into English or in a Western context, because she wasn't just a wedding coordinator or planner. She, you know, you can only have that role if you've gone through like the process of fasting and, you know, you had to kind of go through a process to be able to be the person that can carry out these rituals, which, you know, in Javanese culture, obviously marriage is like really significant. So I was very interested to delve deeper into the origin of these practices that have, you know, that still exist and is still carried on. And I think particularly in Java and Bali, and I haven't really spent much time in other parts of Indonesia, I think it's incredible that the cultural practices are still very rich.
Mm-hmm. And I wondered as well, like, do you ever think about how your audience engages with, you know, the songs of Rinuwat in particular, given that I assume that the majority of your audience are probably not familiar with Indonesian and particularly Bahasa Kawi, you know, let alone, of course, like the culturally specific terminology we've just discussed. You know, does this kind of like come into your mind at all when you're writing lyrics, or, you know, is it something you just don't even think about?
I really try to not humor that concern of because I felt so compelled to change the methods in writing heavy music. So one of the concerns I had in my own mind was this kind of trajectory to, you know, being homogenous. So, and, you know, there was a lot of, you know, the zeitgeist as well is sort of, you know, these talks of like decolonization and a lot of kind of like buzzy words like, decolonization and political identity, you know, identity politics and all of these things in like in heavy music and being in a, you know, like a lot of personal kind of things as well. But I guess I was interested to look at those things from this sort of like subjective view, but also from a very kind of personal view of like, what does that look like to me? What does it look like? What are the mechanics of decolonizing metal? What are the mechanics of, you know, sonically, what does that sound like? From a language perspective, you know, we've been sort of like, I guess, because metal is like exists in this sort of like, it's more prominent in the Western context, or at least like you think that it is, but
in the psyche and stuff.
Being Indonesian and actually experiencing what metal is there, and the richness in history, the folklore, and these ancient practices, culture, knowledge, language, like all of these things. It's like it's sort of right there, and I was very much interested in approaching it in that context. So being informed by by those elements in ancient practices, and being influenced by those elements in my heritage, addressing those antecedent qualities, I guess. So, but it was definitely coming more from like this personal context. I wasn't really trying to like that was the starting point, was, what I'd be interested to see what this could be like, how we could do it. And and sort of like moving through that process, it was like it was a really kind of rewarding and nourishing process for everyone to go through, not just for Rama and I, but also for Mike, because I guess when you sort of like dissolve those parameters of like, this is, if you want to exist and succeed in this genre, this is, these are the rules, this is where it's got to fit in. I think that can really suppress a lot of the potential for experimentation.
So I guess just to try to kind of combine all these ideas together and bring things to a kind of a whole, what ultimately, be it in any language, in any of the genres you work in, do you feel is the ultimate role of lyrics and language in metal broadly, but also in your music specifically?
Well, that's a big question. Don't know if I can answer that. I truly think that language is in the metal context is another component. Mm-hmm. But what I am hoping to discover is the knowledge and wisdom that's embedded in archaic languages like Bahasa Kawi, and they have their own set of rules. And I think when you can familiarize yourself or have an understanding of these different languages, especially the ancient ones, it just sort of, it holds so much more potential, and there's a lot to learn and understand. And I think it is just another tool, to reconcile all these sort of like complexities in the motives, as you described earlier, in the context of the genre.
Does metal, for whatever reason, serve as a place that's really open towards exploring these ancient languages in a way that maybe, I don't know, pop music or reggae or, I don't know, dance hall might not?
I'd love to hear an old Kawi pop song. That would be cool.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
I think I don't think it's bound to metal as a genre. Mm-hmm. But I think like in the context of like pop music and other mainstream, I guess, types of music, is that they have this sort of, perhaps there's more of an intention for mass appeal. Mm-hmm. So I think it restricts the use of highly esoteric ancient languages,
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, so I guess maybe with like more niche subgenres, there's a place for everything. And I think that metal listeners, they're drawn to the genre for a reason. And I just think that for me, I'm fascinated. So as an artist, it's something that I'm keen to acquire more knowledge and learn more and use it in my practice. But I don't know if it connects with everyone, but just as a listener, I'd like to think that as a listener, you want language to almost like the comprehension of the language needs to transcend like, all of the other, it should transcend all those things. And so far, like the feedback is that even though, like even for myself, like I'm performing in a language that is not familiar to me, but somehow innately feels natural, and I feel connected to. And I think that is the sort of like, that's the sonic power of the language itself, not so much the like literal translation of it. And I'm interested in that usage of ancient languages and what that holds in terms of the sonic power.
So where can people go if they want to get access to that sonic power and check it out?
So it's on Bandcamp, and we'll have Heavy Machinery Records and High Tension as well is on Cooking Vinyl. Both you can access through Bandcamp. It's all on Spotify, but go through Bandcamp.
Right.
Yep.
And I think there's the Rinuwat album Dua Naga came out middle of November, but there is a delay on the vinyl. So hopefully that comes soon.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we'll definitely put those links in the description of the episode.
Awesome.
But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about all of this and giving us so much detail in your responses to all of our questions, which, aren't usual questions that you probably be posed in an average interview. So we appreciate you, taking the time to go through it with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for all this detail and this the fascinating original experience.
I really appreciate all the research that the both of you have done, and the questions as well, and also listening to the podcast. I think the great thing about doing these like really long form comprehensive interviews is probably, I don't know if other artists have said this to you, but it's actually a really good way it's good practice to be able to understand your art, because you need to talk about your practice. So I think in the process of things, it's just as useful as like writing an album, and also to kind of think about things retrospectively as well. So thank you very much.
We've gotten a comment a few times. We're always really happy to hear it, because we hope that people get something out of this besides just time.
Having a chat.
Having a chat.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much.
Cheers. Thanks. Take care.
Yeah, matur nuwun. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to Lingua Italica. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope you stay tuned for our next episode. Before we leave, we just wanted to acknowledge that this podcast is recorded on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We pay respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.